And I want to give a hand to Lloyd Marbet and the people of Oregon who did the impossible, and that was they shut down the Trojan reactor. Now, Lloyd mentioned that Navy nuclear submarines are very safe and so forth and so on. But the truth is, when they have problems, the Navy can throw them overboard. We can't. We cannot. And our nuclear reactors are much, much, much larger than the Navy ones. The reactors at Fukushima are the largest in the world. And 6 of them are in total meltdown. They have been melting down since 30 minutes after the tsunami because the cooling systems went off when the earthquake happened, and 90 minutes after the cooling stops, the reactors go into meltdown. This is all a cover-up. This is a false flag. This is more poisoning of the oceans and the atmosphere and the biosphere. No one can escape. Can you? Oh.
You're talking the exact.
Okay. Oh. Okay.
Move this one over this way.
Oh, move it here. Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
This is a breast cancer map of the United States. And I've worked with Jeanette Sherman, Dr. Jeanette Sherman, and with Dr. Ernest Sternglass, who helped to convince the Senate to sign the Partial Test Ban Treaty in 1963. Jeanette and Ernest and I, with another small group, Jay Gould and a few others, collected 6,000 baby teeth from children living around nuclear power plants in the United States. And I went to Japan and I collected baby teeth in Japan. The radiation levels in U.S. baby teeth, British baby teeth, and Japanese baby teeth are higher now than during atmospheric testing. The baby teeth form in the developing embryo and fetus in utero. And so it's like having a dosimeter, a radiation measuring instrument inside that unborn baby. And what happens in the uterus to the developing babies determines the health history for the rest of their lives. This is the Centers for Disease Control breast cancer map. All of this is public information, but just like in Japan, where I bought the vital statistics of Japan, it's all of the health history and diseases reported back to 1898. In the United States, if they go back 20 years, we're lucky. And what they're doing is they're hiding the huge increase, the rise in chronic illnesses since 1945. We're just seeing a very small part of the increase in disease. You can see Hanford, right here, has contaminated the whole entire Columbia River. These are where 2/3 of all breast cancer deaths occurred in the United States between 1985 and 1989.
You should explain what Hanford is. I don't think everyone knows.
How many people know what Hanford is? Hanford is the nuclear weapons program in eastern Washington, a nuclear weapons plant where the plutonium was extracted for the Nagasaki bomb in 1945, and they used it to extract plutonium for the U.S. nuclear weapons program. And the nuclear industry, all aspects of it, think that dilution is the solution to pollution, but it's not. And the great deception, which I will explain in detail later, is that the nuclear industry is not diluting the radiation, they're diluting the data. The radiation is the same. They're diluting the data, and I'll show you as we talk. You can see the huge breast cancer rates over large areas in the Pacific, the Northeast, and in the South. Those are nuclear power plants. And just one or two can contaminate a whole state, like Florida. This is the Idaho Nuclear Engineering Lab, where the plutonium isotope used for spacecraft, which is much hotter than the plutonium used for bombs, is handled, and it crept up the Los Alamos Nuclear Weapons Lab here. It contaminated it so badly that they moved the spacecraft plutonium extraction and manufacture, developing part of it, to Idaho. And it's contaminated the whole Snake River aquifer. It's a huge aquifer. That water is millions of years old. And they just pump that radiation into the ground and say, well, it disappeared. This is where the San Onofre nuclear power plant is, in Southern California, and it downwind from that nuclear power plant is one of the two largest dairy areas in California. Dairy products and drinking water are the two main pathways for radiation into the body. This is where Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant is, in San Luis Obispo, north of Los Angeles. This is the San Francisco Bay Area, and you can see that the Livermore Nuclear Weapons Lab, the Lawrence Berkeley Lab, the UC Berkeley campus, the secret Navy Radiation Research Lab at Hunters Point Naval Shipyard has contaminated that whole region. This is where the Humboldt reactor is in Northern California, and the Humboldt reactor was the first commercially operated GE reactor in the United States. And it had horrific emissions. It contaminated the woods, the trees, the children, the food, the drinking water, the whole environment. And it is now genetic in the population that lives there, the damage from that reactor. This is where, let's see, the Trojan reactor, I believe it's about right there. Is that right?
No, lower.
Lower?
I think, oh, no, you're right. No,
It's up.
Right.
It's up here somewhere.
Yeah, you're right.
And the Trojan reactor, Hanford, and Humboldt have had. I'm going to show you the autism maps in the rainfall areas, the rain shadow of autism, which is downwind and where the highest rainfall is in those three states. In the Columbia River, the radiation that has come out of Hanford, and there's enough plutonium pumped into the ground or leaked into the ground under Hanford to almost build 3 or 4 or 5 nuclear weapons. All that garbage and crap and radioactive trash is leaking into the Columbia River because Hanford is built on a basalt plateau. It's like Swiss cheese. So you pour water in and it disappears, which is exactly what they wanted to do, because we have no nuclear waste repository in the United States. That was the WIP project, the Waste Isolation Pilot Project in New Mexico, which I worked on as a geochemist at the Livermore lab. And what happened is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission got chased out of all the states across the United States, and finally the only place that was left was New Mexico, and that's the Los Alamos lab. And the New Mexico legislature voted to allow the WIP project, but only if the federal government would build a whole new infrastructure of freeways and highways across the whole state. As soon as that project was finished, the highways project, the legislature voted to against, they made a law that prohibited the transport of any nuclear waste across New Mexico highways and freeways. And so the only place that was left was the Nevada test site. And this is Nevada. The Nevada test site is down here somewhere. And I'm sure there's breast cancer there, but cancer isn't even reported in Nevada. And the highway patrolmen always determine the cause of death for anyone who dies in Nevada. So that's a big cover-up. How could you do 1,300 nuclear bomb tests and not have any breast cancer in a state? So, yeah, up above ground, but there were underground tests too. But the Shoshone Indian Nation is the most nuclear bomb nation in the world. And the Shoshones own the land where the Nevada test site is located. Let's see, what was I talking about? So here we have, up in the Columbia River, the chemical effects are being expressed of radiation, especially uranium, has estrogen and hormone disruptors. And what is happening in the human population as well as the animal population, whatever is happening in the animal population is happening in the human population too. And what happens with exposure of male fish to radiation water, contaminated water, is that the estrogen and hormone effects change the male fish once they hatch or they're born into female fish. So in the Columbia River, very early on, it was reported that in salmon populations, the female population was expanding, but the male population was shrinking. I made a graph of the from the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, 1998-99 to 2010. They have been measuring uranium in the drinking water in Los Angeles. And what I discovered when I graphed it is that there are very elevated levels of uranium in the LA drinking water, correlated with all the battles in Iraq and Afghanistan and Yugoslavia. And what's happening in the schools in Los Angeles is that the little boys are disappearing. The classrooms are full of more and more girls and fewer boys. And Jesse Ventura flew me to Minnesota in November for an interview on Great Lakes water and how the water's being polluted and stolen. And